Hello and welcome to Presentation 1 for Psychology of Forgiveness. My name is Brendan Ozawa de Silva. I'm Associate Professor of Psychology in the Department of Positive Human Development and Social Change at Life University. And I'm also Associate Director of the Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics at Life University. So in this presentation, we're going to give an overview of the course. And in this course on Psychology of Forgiveness, we're going to be focusing on three main things: understanding forgiveness, learning practices of forgiveness, and examining measures of forgiveness. So to unpack that a little bit more, under the topic of understanding forgiveness, we're going to be developing a richer conceptual understanding of what forgiveness is from the perspective of psychological research, also from exemplar stories that exemplify forgiveness, and also from contemplative sources. We're also going to be learning practices of forgiveness, mainly from our contemplative sources, focusing on three practices: the Tibetan practice of Lojong, which is described in the book Healing Anger by His Holiness the Dalai Lama; the Japanese practice of Naikan, which is described in the book Psychotherapy and Religion in Japan; and compassionate integrity training, which is available on the website of our Center for Compassion, Integrity, and Secular Ethics, which is compassion.life.edu, where we have free podcasts and downloadable podcasts and practices. We'll also be examining measures of forgiveness that are used in psychology, and we'll be looking at existing scales and critiquing those scales, seeing in what ways they're good and in what ways they could be improved. So to start off with the conceptual understanding, we might ask ourselves, well, what is forgiveness? And we all have an intuitive understanding of what forgiveness is, but in psychology, there's a differentiation that's made between intrapersonal forgiveness and interpersonal forgiveness. So what do those terms mean? Intrapersonal means within a single person, and interpersonal means between two or more people. So a lot of times when we just use the word forgiveness, we tend to conflate or confuse these two meanings. So we kind of put them together, but they really refer to very different things. So interpersonal forgiveness might be when you talk to another person and you say, "I forgive you," or, you say, well, those two people, they were friends, but they haven't forgiven each other yet, so they're not talking to each other anymore. So interpersonal forgiveness can involve reconciliation, for example, or communication. Intrapersonal, though, means within a single person. So that really means releasing resentment and anger, forgiving a person within your own mind, within your own heart. So one clear way we can think about the difference between these two is, for example, you might say you forgive someone, you might outwardly reconcile with them, but inside you're still holding on to anger. So that would mean it looks like there's interpersonal forgiveness, but there isn't intrapersonal forgiveness. There's the appearance of forgiveness, but there isn't a genuine forgiveness there within the individual. Another example would be maybe the person that you forgive isn't alive anymore, or you don't have contact with them. But inside, if you release the anger that you had towards them, that's intrapersonal forgiveness. So of the two, we're going to be focusing more on intrapersonal forgiveness, because that is the mental state of forgiveness. That's the inner state of forgiveness. Whereas interpersonal forgiveness, if it's genuine, is really the outward expression of that forgiveness. That's one way of thinking about it. We can also talk about different types of forgiveness, not just between intrapersonal and interpersonal, but we can talk about the object that we're forgiving. So what is the object of our forgiveness? And we can have forgiveness of self-forgiveness, forgiveness of others. For example, someone who's caused you harm, and forgiveness towards an event, which is really acceptance of that event. So releasing anger and resentment and resistance towards an event that happened. And really, the word acceptance can apply to all three of those. It's a very closely related concept. Forgiveness of self as accepting one's own shortcomings, forgiveness of others, accepting their shortcomings, forgiveness towards an event, accepting that something has happened. Maybe you didn't want it to happen, but it's happened, and you are able to accept that and move on. Now, the important thing to keep in mind when we talk about acceptance is that forgiveness and acceptance do not necessarily mean that you think what happened was good. So forgiving ourselves doesn't mean that we think, well, I did something wrong, I forgive myself, now I think it's okay what I did, or that what others did is okay. So it's very important to recognize that forgiveness can be separated from the idea of judging something as harmful or wrong, and that we can have both of those. We can say that what another person did was wrong, but we still forgive them. A lot of times an obstacle to forgiveness is if we think that forgiving the person means that saying what they did was okay. As an example of an exemplar story, we're going to be looking at the story of Richard Moore. So we have a video called The Dalai Lama's Hero, available on YouTube, that we're watching. And we have other resources with Richard Moore, including some interviews with him. And here, Richard Moore, as you will learn from the video, or you have already learned if you've watched it, is called the Dalai Lama's Hero. He's in the middle here, pictured with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because when he was 10 years old, as a young Irish Catholic schoolboy, he was walking home from school one day, and he was shot by a British soldier, who was actually the individual Charles, who is pictured in the left of this picture. And so when Richard was 10 years old, he was shot by Charles, who fired a rifle that contained hard rubber bullets. These are very large bullets, several inches wide and thick. They're actually lethal, but they were crowd control weapons that the British used to maintain order in their minds in Ireland. And he shot Richard and could have killed him, but actually didn't kill him, but blinded him for life. But Richard never had anger towards the soldier who shot him, even though he didn't understand why it had happened. And his mother raised him in a household of forgiveness, to not have anger towards the British. Even though many in his community did have a lot of anger towards the British, who were viewed as occupiers in the city of Derry in Northern Ireland. Many years later, Richard met His Holiness the Dalai Lama, told him that story, and the Dalai Lama was very impressed and started calling Richard his hero, saying that I talk about forgiveness, but he lives forgiveness. And as a gift to the Dalai Lama, Richard then tried to find the soldier who had shot him almost 40 years earlier, and eventually tracked down Charles, befriended him, expressed his forgiveness to Charles, and the two now give talks together. And this picture shows them visiting the Dalai Lama in the Dalai Lama's home area of Dharamsala, India, where he lives. They're actually visiting a school there where they gave a talk about forgiveness. So we'll be looking at stories like that. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at 3 contemplative sources, and we'll be learning these sources for a conceptual understanding of forgiveness, but also for understanding practices of forgiveness. In the field of positive psychology, we study the science of positive mental states like forgiveness, but we also study the practices of how to achieve those states. And the contemplative traditions have very interesting resources for that. That is something that we can draw upon in positive psychology. So these are the sources where we're going to get that information and those practices. So in conclusion, that concludes our overview of what we're going to explore in this course. And if you like, as your response to this video, you can share a story from your own life that relates to forgiveness, and maybe explain it using some of the concepts that we've talked about, intrapersonal versus interpersonal forgiveness, or other things that you've drawn from the readings or the videos. So thanks so much for watching.